So good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are here watching today. And welcome to the first installment of the Office of Intramural Training and Education series on mental health and well-being for biomedical researchers. I'm Dr. Sharon Milgram, the director of the Office of Intramural Training and Education. And I want to thank all of you for being here. You know, back a couple of months ago, in one of the resilience talks that I gave, I asked the trainees, mostly were grad students and postdocs, but probably a good number of postbacks as well. I asked what were some of the barriers to reaching out and using resources. And I was talking generally about resources for communication skills, resources for navigating career searches, but also in that talk, we covered a lot, resources for mental health and well-being. And by far, the bulk of the responses, it was an open text, just type in what you want, reflected issues around fear and shame and worry and not wanting to express to colleagues and coworkers that individuals were struggling. And I think that we all have a responsibility to each other to look hard at why there is so much fear and shame and difficulty in our community in seeking help, whether that be about progressing in our career or taking care of our health and well-being. Today's topic in our series is culture and stigma, how we look at views of mental health through cultural lenses, how we talk about mental health impacted by various cultural lenses, and what we do when we wish to support others in the process, and how that might be impacted by our cultural lens and their cultural lens. And we're going to define culture very broadly. I know we tend to think about our family and what we learned early on from communities where we grew up, but the honest truth is we have a culture of science that makes it really hard to talk about this topic. And we bring in our own cultures that actually add on to what's already difficult. I want to stress that taking care of our mental health and well-being is an ongoing and regular process. So I hope that everyone here is here both for themselves and to support others. I will say that, you know, I organize this and at times I think, oh, I'm here for others. The honest truth is I too am here for myself. We all have to work hard all the time to take good care of ourselves, especially as we enter a second winter dealing with the pandemic. So much uncertainty, so much stress around the discourse of the pandemic and actually the discourse of many other things. The series this year is going to follow a slightly different path than last year. This year, we're going to host a talk the first Monday of the month. And then throughout the month, we're going to have these deeper dives, chances for you to come and discuss one element of the webinar in small groups. The small groups will be facilitated by mental health professionals who work with us here at the NIH. And I hope that they will provide an outlet and an avenue for having difficult conversations. Difficult conversations have a way of getting easier as we practice and as we have them. And I certainly have learned that in my work here, talking about well-being, mental health, and taking good care of ourselves. And so I'm really honored today to introduce Jen Wiggins, a colleague from the Office of Intramural Training and Education. Jen has brought her passion for talking about mental health and well-being, for supporting trainees from all communities in their path towards well-being and mental health. She has taught me a great deal in her, I think it's about a year, maybe a little bit more that she's been here with us in the OITE. Today, Jen is going to kick us off, and then she's going to share a pre-recorded tape that we did a couple of weeks ago. And then Jen will help us wrap up with discussion, and she will talk about the opportunities for further dialogue coming up soon. Let me just say we've reached over 225 people here. I think that it is a testament to how much we all would like to see a warmer, more supportive, and more welcoming biomedical research community, that people come to this talk. And I know many more will watch it on tape. And so I thank all of you for joining us in this really important dialogue. So Jen, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. Hello, everybody. As Sharon said, my name is Jen Wiggins, pronouns she, her. I am a wellness advisor in OITE. Thank you all for joining us for our first part of our mental health well-being series. It's the first one, so I'm really excited about it, but I can't wait to see you join us for our others. And so we're going to be talking about stigma and culture as it really relates to how we talk about mental health, how we think about our symptoms, how we talk to our supervisors, how we talk to people in our lives about it. We really want to think about stigma as how it really creates this foundation for sometimes the barrier for us to really be well. And we want to be able to break that down, not just for the cultures that we come from, our places of origin, but also for the biomedical research field. And regarding the series, our tentative schedule, as you all have seen on our website, will run until May. And so we'll be covering different topics such as anxiety and anxiety disorders, depression and depressive disorders, community wellness, executive functioning, and responding to trauma. And so this will be the foundation and scaffolding for our time together as we head into the spring. But we will think about how do we have these deeper dives, as Sharon mentioned. And so we talk about this idea of having supplemental sessions. We all go to talks and we're like, okay, yes, I got it. Culture shapes the way that I engage with wellness, the way I talk about wellness, but what do I do next? And so the supplemental sessions that will be with each part of the series will take you to a deeper level. It'll help you build skills. It'll help you be able to have those difficult conversations and allow them to feel more natural. They'll be able to give you sessions on how do you actually manage some of your anxiety? How do you manage your depressive symptoms? How do we build communities of care? And so for the supplemental sessions connected to this seminar, we're actually going to have a talk on Thursday on difficult conversations. And this will give people the space and the ability to be able to talk about, how do I actually talk to someone about this? And then when someone talks to us about it, how do we actually be able to share in a way that feels comfortable for us, but also be able to support others? And that's the thing we really want to think about, right? When fostering communities of care, it's not just us being able to share what's going on with us, but it's also being able to say, I talked to someone, they heard me, and I feel that I can support people when they talk to me about mental health. The other session that we'll offer will be next week, and this is a session on emotion regulation skills. And that'll be a group where folks can come and learn some tricks and tips on how they can work to emotionally regulate when they're seeking to manage their mental health. In OITE, I'm sure you've all heard Sharon mention this many, many, many times. To do well, we have to be well. And when we say that, we really want to think about what are the foundational pieces of our wellness. What does it mean to take care of yourself physically, emotionally, psychologically for your mental health, along with the spirit? The spirit will be different for everyone. This might be your religious values. For me, it's how do I fill my cup? So thinking broadly, how are we connected to something greater outside of ourselves? So when we talk about culture and related to the piece about the foundational pieces of wellness, you want to think about how culture has created a lens in which you look at those parts of yourself and how you care for those parts of yourself. And so culture, some things about thinking about the people that we're talking about, the communities that we come from. And this can be anything from our language, our religion, our spiritual belief systems, our social habits, the food we eat, the music that we listen to, art that is associated with our culture. But you want to think about what is the accessibility points around culture when it comes to mental health, right? When we say language, what do you talk about when you say mental health? Do you use the term mental health? Do you use the term wellness or resilience? And so creating a space in which we acknowledge how the culture shapes all the ways in which, or the words or language that we have to speak about something, or even sometimes the absence of it. And you want to also think about the context of culture. Culture impacts us on different levels. And when we talk about wellness, we want to think about all the messages that we receive on those different levels. So it's the individual context, you as your personal self, our familial obligations, the messages that we receive from those that we consider to be our family, our communities. And so that can be anything from the neighborhood that we live in to the church community that we are a part of, to even being in a lab space, right? All those community pieces will then impact how we see wellness in those different spaces. And policy, I think sometimes we forget about policy and culture. A culture of a people will also dictate what does their policy look like when it comes to mental health care. And that can be anything from what is written in insurance policy, right? Or even thinking about how grants are funded through, public systems or political systems that create funding for resources in communities. So you want to remember, it's not just us when we think about our individual self, it's also our families, it's also the people we talk to every day, the people we work with, and people who we don't even acknowledge are behind the scenes creating policies around wellness, around mental health in our lives. So for shaping wellness, here are the things I want us to be grounded in and we go into our conversation today. So you will see in the video a deeper dive into some of these points, but I also want us to think about our place of origin, the power dynamics, experiences, expectations, and media as they relate to how our wellness is formed. So when we think about places of origin, our family, those that parented us, we get message from them. Our parents will model for us, the folks that have parented us. Well, how did they handle their stress? How did they respond when we were having emotional responses? And what did we internalize from that? Cultural norms. Sometimes we might come from a culture where we don't speak about our mental health and it might feel taboo. So then that might silence some of the narratives that we have around our mental health and wellness. Or do we come from a place where we openly talk about our mental health and it's comfortable to do that and it feels supported and accepted? Geography, sometimes when we think about accessibility, where we are geographically plays a major role in what access to wellness and conversations about mental health look like. And so this could mean if I live in a rural area, I might not have as many resources as someone living in a city, which then will shape the messaging, the education, the ability to access the resources, and that will then be an impact on your wellness journey. Hierarchical systems, there is no way that we can escape a hierarchical system. And so whether that's in your lab setting, whether that's in your home and familial setting, we look to those who are in leadership to model wellness for us. And so when we're a part of a hierarchical system, we really do internalize those messages from those that we look to as elders, as leaders, for how we should engage in our wellness. Our experiences with our mental health. Each of us has a mental health, and sometimes we don't think about our journeys with our mental health, but we all have them, right? So times in your life where you're like, I might have struggled at that point in time, and so I might have enlisted these resources, or I struggled at that time, and I wish I had these resources. And so how do those experiences that you have had in the past create a foundation for how you create experiences for yourself in the future for your wellness journey? Expectations, sometimes in the biomedical research field, most times we're used to high stress. And when we're in high stress environments, sometimes we have a greater expectation for ourselves to perform, to be productive, to be well. But we want to recognize that sometimes those expectations can be unrealistic when we have long hours or a lot of time put into the lab space or in our research and the dedication that we are rewarded for in this community. It sometimes then minimizes the expectation that we might have for our wellness. Or on the other side, it might be, I actually have an expectation to develop a work-life balance for myself. I might have an expectation that I want to be physically active or eating well. And so being mindful that those expectations that we might not even thought about consciously are present. The media is probably one of the biggest influences that we often see on a day-to-day basis. And so this can be anything from something that we might see on TV, an article that we might have read online, or even something that we've seen on TikTok or Instagram, all those social media platforms that we frequent. And so the media can, help or hinder us. So one of the things you want to be mindful of or be aware of, what is the media that I am accessing actually talking to me about when it comes to my wellness? How is it helping it? How is it supporting it? And is it possibly hindering it? We want to recognize that culture feeds our behavior across the board. It shapes how we acknowledge or accept our symptoms or a diagnosis of mental health or mental illness. It dictates our perspectives on preventative health or health promotion behaviors. I think, Sharon mentioned in the beginning, the idea of really getting ahead and wanting to be proactive about our mental health actually sets us in a greater space to be thriving and really reaching our fullest potential. But if we come from a culture in which sometimes we aren't considering the preventative health measures, um, consider the preventative health measures, we then aren't always setting ourselves up or priming ourselves for success. So in OITE, we encourage people to really think about your wellness in advance, plan for your wellness, make time for your wellness. Sometimes our culture can impact the amount of control that people feel that they have in controlling or preventing their illness. Sometimes we might think about this in the lens of, okay, I'm feeling anxious. I'm just going to be anxious until I reach this deadline. But sometimes it's actually, oh, I am feeling anxious. I want to actually proactively manage my anxiety or manage my stressors. And so, this idea of wanting to prevent mental illness, we do have tools, we do have accessibility to things. And in OITE, we hope to empower people to feel that they have that. Power dynamics within the realm of medicine, I think we often forget that there is sometimes the hierarchical power differential when we're working with a medical professional. And anytime we receive a diagnosis, whether it could be a physical health diagnosis or a mental illness diagnosis, we sometimes take what the provider has said and we're like, okay, yes, this is it. And having, some of that agency taken away from us. But we want to recognize that the relationship that we have with a mental health provider, a wellness provider, is that they are a part of our journey. And then culture also feeds the behavior of how we perpetuate perceptions of youth and aging. And this feels relevant when we talk about maybe I might have been an anxious kid and now I'm an anxious adult. I should be different. I should be better. But those should statements lean into our cognitive distortions, sometimes making it difficult for us to access resources that support our mental health. So we really want to be mindful that there's no one way to be a young person and no one way to be aging, and that idea of a continuum of mental health and wellness will look different on that spectrum. And we want to promote wellness across the entire spectrum versus creating perceptions of how one should look or should feel or be performing at any age. So for the recording that I'm going to play on the panel, there will be folks digging a little bit deeper into these different barriers for wellness, but I want to make sure that we give a broad overview of that before we jump into the video. And so each of us will face a different set of barriers based upon our identity, where we come from, our journey in our wellness, the point in which we are engaging in our wellness. But this idea of really understanding what your individual barriers might be, and then also some of those in the community that you're a part of. So when we want to talk about this idea of supporting others, we also want to be aware of the barriers that people who are not us, who might not come from communities that we come from, might face different barriers from us. And we want to be able to be open and understanding of those. Lack of access to resources is probably the greatest barrier that any one person could face. And this I touched on earlier, could be because of geography, it could be because of socioeconomic status, it could be because of multicultural proficiency. Sometimes we want to see a provider that looks like us or comes from a community like us, or that we feel will just get what we're talking about without having to explain. And sometimes we might not have access to folks that represent the communities that we come from or have a really deep understanding of our experiences, and that can create a potential barrier. Social stigma, which we'll talk more about in the panel that I will play, education or general lack of awareness. So going back to this idea of even language, of understanding what mental health is, what does it mean to be well, or understanding this idea of how do I even access the systems, right? So we could have access, we might have the socioeconomic capacity to go to therapy, we might have the health insurance that will allow us to go, but these systems are a bit tricky to navigate sometimes. And that becomes the piece of our activation energy where we might say, I know I want to go and talk to someone, but I don't even know where to start. And in our OITE wellness team, that's really what we want to promote, right? How do we help bridge the gap for folks to be able to get the education and resources that they might need and are definitely deserving of? Religious values, which we will talk more deeply in the panel, but sometimes our religious values can create a barrier for us in regards to engaging with our wellness, engaging with our mental health. and historical racism. If anything, from the research field to the medical field, or even just this lack of distrust that exists amongst the world, the historical racism can create a barrier for folks wanting to step into a space of talking about their mental health or trusting that someone can provide them that support. Resilience, you often hear us talk about this. I never want to talk about our barriers without thinking about how resilient we can be, and also how our communities that we come from have protective features embedded into them. And so defining resilience, it's not just a trait, it's also a process. It's our ability, our skill set to face and overcome adversity or the stressors that we face on a day-to-day basis. And the better equipped you are to navigate stressors really speaks to how resilient you are. And so in thinking about the rest of this series, right, if we want to talk about anxiety symptoms or depressive symptoms or community wellness, all of those things will help support you in your resiliency, and it'll also allow you to tap into your protective features, right? The protective features are qualities that are innate to you, things that you might not think about, or the things about your culture that makes you smile, to say, I am well because I am in community, I am enjoying the people that I'm with, or I come from a strong people, I come from a group of people that are determined and resilient. And so being able to acknowledge that those things can be dormant, they can be conscious, they can be unconscious, but we can always use the benefit of building upon them. All right, and time for our panel.
Thank you all so much for joining me today for this discussion on wellness and mental health and how our families and cultures inform the way that we deal with our health and wellness, and how we reach out for support or don't reach out for support. I'm really pleased to be hosting this discussion and look forward to some really interesting dialogue and back and forth. I want to start by having each of you introduce yourselves, and we'll start with Jen.
Hi everyone, my name is Jen Wiggins, pronouns she, her. I am a wellness advisor in the Office of Intramural Education here at the NIH. I am a licensed professional counselor specializing in trauma and serving marginalized communities.
Thank you. Welcome, Jen. Brandon, we'll go to you next.
Everyone, thanks for this opportunity. I'm Brandon Court, a psychiatrist and a medical anthropologist, and I'm the director of the Division of Global Mental Health at George Washington University.
Thank you, Brandon, for joining us. Samira?
Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. My name is Samira Krisha. I'm an occupational therapist, and I work at the intersections of mental and sexual health education in Muslim spaces. And after nonprofit work, I founded my own business last year, Sexual Health for Muslims.
Thank you so much. Ana?
Hi, everyone. My name is Ana Ordonez. I am a child and adolescent psychiatrist and an adult psychiatrist, and I'm the director of the Office of Clinical Research at the National Institute of Mental Health.
Great. Thank you all, and welcome. So I want to start by diving right in. The goal today is to begin our month-long dialogue about culture and stigma and how we attend to our well-being and mental health. And I think it goes without saying that cultural and social perspectives shape how each of us understands our own mental health, how we cope with daily stressors, how we reach out for support. I wonder if you could share a little bit some examples of where you see this help or hinder an individual as they work on finding balance and health. And let's be informal. Anyone who wants to kick us off is more than welcome. You can share a personal perspective, things from your professional experience, whatever feels right. Thanks, Samira.
Yeah, so when you ask this question, I'm reflecting on working with Muslims specifically and how faith and spirituality is often seen as a source of strength. And with mental health, it can be seen as a hindrance because of the stigmatization and the misunderstandings of where mental health issues originate from. So for example, Muslims are often told, use spirituality when you're struggling with mental health, and that can really help you connect with your source and connect with your purpose. And at the same time, I've worked with Muslims who misunderstand the origin of mental health concerns, where they think that it might be a punishment for something that they've done, or there's this religious perspective that is inaccurate. So it's interesting how it's supposed to help holistically, but how for many factors, religion and spirituality can sometimes hinder someone who is faith-based from seeking support because of their understanding of the problem.
Thank you. Anna?
Yeah, so I was born and raised and grew up in South America, in Colombia, which was a country, I mean, at the time when I was growing up, there was a lot of violence and civil unrest. And I think as a country, the culture that I grew up in, there was a big sense of we're very resilient people. We always push forward. We have strong communities and families, and we get through things regardless of how hard they are. And that was really wonderful. I think, I grew up really thinking that we were resilient and that there's always a way of solving problems. At the same time, I think because of that framework, there's also not the same understanding, I guess, always when something really hard happens or when we're trying to identify how these really hard things affect us, because, it makes it a little bit harder sometimes to voice when you're not feeling resilient or when you're, really struggling with the situation. So it has two sides, one that's very positive and one that sometimes may miss some of the things we want to attend to.
Jen?
I would also like to add, sometimes the cultural component can create limitations for language that we have about what we're experiencing. And so let's say if my family of origin, if we don't really speak about stressors or anxiety or label it that, I might then go to another space in which I might say, oh, this is stress, and someone might say, oh, that's anxiety. And sometimes it creates this cross-cultural education that might need to happen when we aren't necessarily exposed to language or even kind of like modalities of treatment. And so then trying to figure out the context for these things that are unfamiliar to us can serve as a challenge. I would also want to say, as a helpful piece and kind of connecting to Samira's component around spirituality, I think that there is a part of spirituality that pushes us towards mindfulness. So being able to be reflective, to check in with ourselves, whether it's time to meditate or time for prayer, that is a cultural component that can then help us align to say, okay, my health and wellness or my mental health might not be aligned with how I want to be navigating this world right now. And so that then can serve also as a way to propel me forward to then learn those languages, cross those barriers, or even create that dialogue with wellness support or spiritual leaders or whatever that looks like for a community.
Brandon, I imagine you want to add some things, but before we do that, I just want to put something out there, and even if we just circle back to it later. So a lot of comments have been made around spirituality and faith and the intersection of wellness and how we connect with this broader purpose. For scientists, we work in a very rational field. And in fact, I think many people give some subtle messages about the value of religion. Many of them not especially positive messages about that value. And I wonder if that creates this really internal dissonance for some of our trainees. A part of their wellness is their faith, yet they are hearing disparaging comments about faith in general. And whether that's an element of the stigma that we need to address. We need to destigmatize faith. We need to destigmatize mental health, and somehow there is some intersection there. And we can park that for a moment, Brandon, if you have something else you wanted to address and add to the discussion, but it really prompted me to want to make sure to bring that up.
No, that's great. And I can definitely incorporate that. It really resonates with what I wanted to add. What I was going to share is that I think when the word stigma comes up, immediately we focus on all the negative connotations, and it often, basically reducing it to just ignorance, that if people knew better, they wouldn't have this stigma. And really, if we understand stigma from a cultural perspective, Stigma arises from those things that are really important to you and your community and your family and everything else. And so stigma comes out of what matters most to a person. So if we can look at stigma in terms of, well, why is that stigma happening? What's the threat involved by saying I have a mental health problem? I think at the most fundamental value, it's being included in one's social circles, one's family, one's community, one's cultural group. And if in some way self-identification of having psychological distress and mental illness threatens that, then there's going to be a lot of hesitation. So it's not really about ignorance of mental health problems. It's about some cost that may come from bringing that up. For people in other roles, there may be different things from just social exclusion related to mental illness in terms of, fears related to it. And some cultures, fears of that this is something that if I spend time with somebody who's a mental illness, it's going to give me a mental illness as well from the distress. But I think at its core, trying to understand what matters most to a person that then leads to that rising of stigma. And spirituality is a perfect topic to tie into that, because while identification with one's religious and spiritual community is really important, as Samira is saying, there can also be conflicts around that. And as you just shared, Sharon, I think especially those in the biomedical mental health community, we've really put fuel to the fire around those conflicts so that people who are supposed to be mental health providers, thinking about the individual holistically, the social world holistically, we often emphasize a very specific biomedical model that doesn't realize how these pieces all come together. So part of it is also a healing community, including but not exclusive to biomedicine, that takes a broader perspective. And we've seen that around the world in many global settings, how the partnerships of people in the religious community and those in the medical community working together can produce some of the most effective individual and community-based care systems.
When it comes to thinking about mental health care and healthcare in general, I mean, here in the US, we really have embedded all of that in Western science and medicine. I mean, we really take a very Western approach. Even as many of us learn about other approaches and say, well, it would be interesting to try Reiki. And of course, yoga, in many ways, we've tried very much to Westernize completely. And I wonder if you can comment on ways that as a community of scientists, we could support varied cultural pathways to discussing all of this, embedding and inviting these other perspectives into our discussion, as opposed to, you are stressed, you should seek this. You seem much more anxious than I think you should be, you should do that. We have this sort of linear model.
I was reflecting on what Brandon just shared. And within an occupational therapy framework, there's a paradigm shift from what's the matter with you to what matters to you. And I think that's so important. I'm currently studying Islamic psychology, and this conversation of how can we really infuse different cultural perspectives? I think we have to understand how we've lost that. A lot of understandings around mental health from for example, from Islamic perspective have been colonized. The soul has been taken out. It's become a reductionistic, machine-focused analysis of the mind and body. And it wasn't like that, though, in terms of Islamic history. We have scholars in the 9th, 10th century, like al-Balkhi, who talked about cognitive behavioral approaches well before modern times. So I think there's so much wisdom in tradition. Tradition is not backwards or oppressive, which a lot of people think. So if we're going to talk about meeting the needs of various cultures and communities, there's wisdom in tradition. And I think by leaning on people who have expertise in that, we can kind of bring it forward and then combine that with what matters to you. How can we bridge that? And how can we understand your experience in terms of your mental health and use that traditional wisdom combined with what we know of science, of course, like Islam doesn't dismiss science, but use it in a more balanced and holistic way.
Thank you. Jen, you want to add something to that?
I actually, and to Samira's point, listening, I think actively listening to people when they're talking to us about their mental illness, about their symptom presentation, and then being able to be patient. So being able to acknowledge, I've sat with clients from, the therapeutic standpoint who will say, therapy, Black people don't do therapy. We don't talk about our problems. And so when I hear that, I'm like, okay, but I know therapy could be really helpful for this person. And so then for me, it's that piece of providing education, but also having patience within myself. Because sometimes when we say, well, this is, the efficacy is proven here, do these things and this will help with this. But if that person is not prepared to hear that, my job is to active listen, be patient, and let them take the lead, right? Any individual person has the ability to have the agency to choose their course for care, to choose their course for treatment, and discern what that looks like for them. But sometimes we move so quickly to problem solve and to say, well, I know this works and it's proven, but to say we have to know what works for that individual person and sometimes individual communities.
Anna?
Yeah, I've been listening to what everybody's saying, and I think that something that I'm thinking about is that maybe as we think about spirituality and religion, as we think about culture, it's just to hold that none of these things are simple concepts, right? And because of that, they can mean different things to different people. So for one person, tradition or spirituality may represent something that has excluded them and has been judgmental and has been really negative. And for other people, it may represent something that has brought them out of a really difficult situation. And so I think as we talk about culture and we talk about all of these different perspectives, as Jen is saying, we just want to listen and understand that these are not simple terms. They're not reduced to little boxes, and they mean different things to different people. And I think if we can hold that, then and understand more, we can help people find what matters to them and leverage all of those things in their communities and in their environment that help support that.
So I wonder if all of you could step out of your professional roles for a moment. So here I am sitting with four healthcare professionals. I'm a cell biologist who does education now, but has very little grounding in the language of healthcare. I mean, the majority of conversations about health and well-being start between two non-experts, right? At least not to say that you all don't talk to your friends about your health and well-being, but in our community, right? It's a cell biologist talking to a computational biologist, could be from really different places, really different families. So we're beginning these conversations. How do we what language should we be learning, trying on, exploring to help people reflect on their own barriers to taking care of themselves and then choosing next steps? Like what is good language for at this point, we are all supporters of each other. We are all in this together, right? So what would you, if you were coaching us, what would you tell us to, so I hear listen, right? I heard that from Jen, I heard that from Anna. It's really clear, right? We have to slow down and listen. But after we listen, what do we say? Go ahead, Brandon.
I think listening is 98.5% of the work. And I think that if there are certain terms that we as a medical community try to impose, that often can deter mutual understanding. And that even when somebody is using more psychological terminology with friends, it could mean something totally different. The way that, and it could mean something different for that same individual when they describe it in the morning versus the evening versus 5 or 6 months later. So terms like, I'm depressed, I'm traumatized, I'm stressed. Stressed sounds like a light term, but it could mean somebody's kind of at the end of their rope. So that's where I think it goes to listening and creating a space and then asking questions to help an individual explore what it is that they're feeling. Because often we pick the easiest word hanging around to describe what we're going through when we haven't even thought it through. I'm a mental health professional, and the amount of time it takes me to really understand what my emotional state is to describe to my family, loved ones, friends, it takes me a while. So I do think it's not imposing any particular language into a conversation, but really asking an individual who's in distress to spend some time thinking about that with you, think through it together. What is it that's bothering them? How are they feeling about it? And ultimately, what is lost in some way? Back to Samira's point of like what matters to you, what's missing in the moment that's really driving that stress. And when we begin to tackle that, it also then opens up what's the pathway to try and regain that. Because back to, I think, the problems of a purely medical model, if all we're trying to do is focus on reducing a symptom, and I'm really getting good about learning symptom terms as opposed to helping that life open up again and be more resilient, be more stress-free, be more rewarding, that a symptom focus is not going to get us along that path.
Jen?
I just taking a couple of steps back, I want to encourage people to acknowledge, thank you for sharing that with me. That might be really difficult to share with someone, because when we think about the point in time in which we feel enough stress that we feel comfortable to bring that to work, because in the biomedical research field, many people will say, I want to leave my emotions at home. I want to leave kind of all my problems at the door. But we are one complete being. We can't say, okay, I'm going to turn off my anxiety as I head into the lab today. And so when someone is able to bring that to us, we want to acknowledge and thank them for sharing. We also want to try and validate it in a way that says, this is actually really stressful work, or, where you are in your training, that can be really tough. And so being able to find a language that reinforces for them, I don't have to minimize my mental health or how it's presenting in this space or the way it's impacting my work. I would say to scientists, try not to immediately jump to the problem solving piece. And that goes back to what Brandon's saying, like 90% of it is the listening, so that you can kind of help piece together what the person is really trying to tell you. And to say that I'm here to support you. And so knowing resources, educating yourself about resources in the community. So I would say you don't have to be a therapist. That's why, OIT wellness advisors are here at the NIH to say, I know someone that it might be helpful for you to chat with. Would you like me to make that e-connection? So finding ways in which you can feel that I've heard you, I see you, okay, how can I also help get you connected? And sometimes that might involve a plan to say, hey, after you talk to that person, let's circle back to figure out how we might want to reconnect about how this is showing up at work, or the plan for helping the research move forward. Because we also want to be mindful that ultimately the idea that we don't have our mental illness show up in the way that our work still doesn't feel good or doesn't feel true to who we are as individuals.
But ultimately, we can't do that unless we first listen openly to the stories. So the importance of, the sort of tradition piece that Anna talked about, that Samira mentioned, right? That Jen said, right? In my community, here is how we think, feel, talk about these topics. If we really aren't comfortable hearing, stories that are rooted in people's cultures, and that can be family, right, country, faith community, whatever. If we skip over that, then when we say, I see you, I hear you, we're not actually saying that, right? So in many, many ways, I think what I'm hearing is, when you say 90% listening, right, that really in many ways brings down the stress. I don't need to be an expert. I need to learn how to listen to people share who they are in a slow, calm way. But that means being very, very open to, my lived experience was really different than yours, is different from the next person's, and they all are valid lived experiences, and I need to be comfortable hearing that. And in some ways, it really starts with a discussion of identity and inclusion and sort of understanding each other. There is a culture of science. So I'm going to go off a little bit, Jen. I hope it's okay. You can bother me about it later. we're talking about culture, and I mentioned a little bit the culture of science earlier. Brandon, you mentioned stigma is rooted in fear of what you will lose. And of course, I think discussions of well-being and mental health, and actually, quite frankly, physical health in the biomedical workspace, people are afraid what they will lose is the status of their project, of their progress, that people will view them as intellectual experts, that we sort of have to be these super people who don't have bodies and minds and hearts. So I wonder if you could address within this community, which is such a pressured, high knowledge community, what can we all do to help each other embrace wellness? You just in general, right? But also mental health. Like, what can each of us do to change this conversation? Go ahead, Brayden.
So if I look at the mental health community in particular, and especially the actions kind of in the global community, is that it's taken us a long time to partner and collaborate with people with lived experience. And when you begin to do that, you suddenly notice that there's a huge gray zone, right? That I'm the practitioner or the researcher, I'm the expert, and this is a person with lived experience. After time together, you realize, like, actually no, and you actually get people more often opening up. I have, a number of colleagues who in the field of mental health research identify as I'm a service user, I'm a person with lived experience. And I think when those conversations become normalized, then people can share. And it's also seen, going back to the analogy of a physical illness, is I think the difference between, I have a physical illness, which in some cases might be something that temporarily forces me to step away from my research, but then I can come back and do it. Unless you're a highly skilled neurosurgeon, like breaking an arm isn't going to end your research career forever and ever, right? Happens to all of us, and we recover and we go back to that. Why can't we think about mental health in the same way? This is not an on-off switch. We will all go in and out of these states. So I think part of it is creating a culture of acceptance, of conversation, of sharing, and having people, especially those, like you said, that are leaders in the field, be the ones who are disclosing to then normalize those conversations. These are all things that we go in and out of, rather than I study it, I suffer from it. That is a totally false dichotomy.
And I could tell, I think you have something to add.
Yeah, I would agree with Brandon. I was thinking about, I think something we can each start doing is kind of embracing being more vulnerable and being okay with that. Like, talking about our mistakes, our errors, and, as we traveled through these different steps, and how, that's okay. And then we kept going, like our failures, the things we did wrong. The things that were really stressful or really difficult, the types of fears we had before that big, talk or whatever presentation you were going to give. I think just being able to be comfortable with being more vulnerable about, all the things that weren't so great, because we're always presenting all the things that went well. And I think that is a small step that we can start taking to just, do a little bit more of what Brandon is saying, is really getting through all the gray and making it a smaller space. Or a smaller distance, I guess.
Yeah, thank you. Jen?
I would add on to that the idea that modeling and normalizing doesn't often also have to be verbal, right? And so when we think about, maybe I have a postback who I might be meeting with who is like, oh, my PI never takes a day off. And I'm like, okay, but you are also a postback, right? The PI has different responsibilities, but then to see in a space where a postback said, well, my PI actually took the day off today. And that then signals for me to say, it actually might be okay for me to take the day off as well. So being mindful that sometimes the more covert ways in which we can model wellness and giving permission to other people is also important, not always the verbal vulnerability.
So you broke in and out there, but I think what you were expressing was the more senior people can model taking time away, or, I'm frazzled, so I'm going to go take a walk right now, right? It's not always our words, but it's our actions.
All right, folks. I am going to stop my screen share and we are going to open for discussion questions, and Sharon is going to help field some of the commentary that we've had.
So Jen, the first question comes in response to Anna's comments about in her community and country and culture, the war led to this extreme view of we can get through everything. And it's from someone who's a third generation survivor of the Holocaust, asking about that idea of toxic positivity, that when you are rooted in a community that has experienced extreme trauma, nothing happening to you matches that trauma, and that can really silence people. I wonder if you could comment to that.
I think, some of that is really rooted in our comparison of experiences with other people. I think we tend to use someone else's experiences with strife, with trauma, with adversity as our comparison for wanting to lean into what feels good for our mental health and wellness. And the toxic positivity, I think it's difficult because I think that's something that we see in the media. We hear people saying, just think positively. And, I'm of the school of thought of how do I acknowledge where I am in this moment and cater to that versus taking a space of let me really reflect upon my experiences in comparison to others. When we are a part of communities that have experienced trauma, the generational trauma has an impact, right? We're not always so far removed as we might think that we are. And so wanting to say, I acknowledge that this is what someone else experienced, but I also want to hold space for what I am experiencing, and being able to say that doesn't mean I have to be positive. That does mean that I might need to say I need to take a break, or I might need to talk to someone about what is going on. And so really identifying that you are deserving of care and time and wellness, despite what your personal experiences are.
Great, thank you. In the chat were some comments made about the difficulty now of the extension of the pandemic, the optimism of vaccines, and the reopening now followed by really again, another spike, the uncertainty of Omicron. And while it doesn't relate to culture per se, I think it's a really important thing to talk about. Is so when something goes on and on and on, and your go-to strategies start feeling like there's not quite enough, what are your thoughts of what someone can do for themselves or help others in doing?
I think, it might not be directly tied to culture, but our difficulty sitting with the discomfort of uncertainty is a very human experience, and we are all humans. But I would say be proactive. And so Sharon mentioned earlier the winter coming. We will say to ourselves, yes, I know the winter is coming. I know things will start to transition. The things I had hoped for might not come to fruition. Take the moment to plan for that. Because the one thing that you will notice about your mental health is that it has a pattern. So the days are shorter, it's getting darker really early, it's cold out. How do you buffer for the things that you know you will go through? Who do you access for resources when you say, I don't know where to start? But I say, make a plan. And going from there, that gives you the ability to find flexibility for when the times are more difficult. And so some of the pieces of resiliency really lean into this idea of opportunities in advance versus first focusing on the adversity in the moment.
Right, thank you. There's a question here about reducing the stigma associated with being a target of harassment and bullying at work. And I see this a lot where trainees come and they tell me about what they've experienced. And I just think, shame on us for letting that happen. We owe you so much better. Yet from the perspective of the person on the receiving end, there's this level of self-blame and an assumption that the target did something to deserve it, which then really leads to hiding and makes it much harder to get support. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about your thoughts of that.
I would say, the body sends us messages, stressors send us messages, whether they're cognitive, emotional, physical messengers. And that idea of feeling that you are deserving of the blame is one of those responses to the stress, right? The message that cognitively you are hearing that. And when you are having those moments of thoughts, I think that's a good time to check in with someone to really have a sounding board to help you sort through some of those. Because sometimes our experiences are really reflections of core beliefs that might not be supportive or even some of our cognitive distortions. And so having a sounding board that can help you take a step back, acknowledge, what is okay, actually validate that, this experience that your stress is actually causing you to really exude in this moment, that we can work on that, but also being able to find advocates to help support wellness and thriving in the lab space.
Thank you. And do you think the pandemic is going to create a generational trauma that we're all going to carry this forever? And I guess not as completely a non-expert, I think we are all forever changed by this experience. I wonder if you can reflect on, from a mental health perspective, how we can make meaning and maybe minimize any unhelpful impact.
The one thing that I wish I did in the beginning of the pandemic was actually chronicle all the things that I've seen about people's mental health during this time, because I think this is the first time that I've ever seen a community normalize, I'm not doing okay, or normalizing, I have more time, so I actually want to invest in some of the things that really do fill my cup, or think about some of the pieces of your emotional and psychological and physical wellness. And so I do think we'll be forever changed. I do think what we will experience when things start to feel a bit more normal, we will want to shed some of the things that we've accepted about our mental health, about our wellness practices. And I encourage people to think about, how do you hold on to those as the world will continue to change, and you deepen your experience of reflection around wellness or your wellness journey, or promoting communities of wellness.
And so hopefully one thing that comes out of this is we all find ways to put ourselves first more often, and to help others put themselves first. We're going to wrap up. There is a question in there about looking for support for accountability in terms of taking care of yourself. One of the reasons why we want to have these small group discussions scattered throughout the month is we all need accountability in many, many ways. And so I hope that in terms of accountability and in terms of extending the dialogue and having a chance to hear from others, that you'll consider joining us. The first of our deeper dives is this Thursday, and the second one is the following Thursday. We usually have an activity called Thriving Thursday, and so join us for some special Thriving Thursdays. And that's one element of accountability. Another one is just in your community, talk about today. Hey, I heard this. Would you mind taking a look at it? I'd love to talk a little bit. Maybe we could check in. There is also a question about finding referrals for therapists. And I'm not sure if you're here at NIH or you are outside, but if you email OITE Wellness, if you're here, we'll meet with you. And if you're somewhere else, we will make sure that you get the support you need. I think that sometimes one of the biggest barriers to all of this is we get started, we hit a roadblock, and we take it as some message not to move forward. So I'm going to put our wellness email right here. And I invite you to email. We unfortunately don't have unlimited capacity and can't necessarily meet individually with folks outside NIH, but we can do our best to point you in directions that will be helpful. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to honor your time and finish as scheduled. I want to thank Jen and all of the panelists and all of you for being here. Stay safe. Make some plans to, I'm going to use Jen's language I really like, fill up your cup. I went to a museum this week and I hadn't realized how much I had deeply missed that. It was such a visceral feeling of filling up my cup. So go and fill yours, whether that's with dance or walk. whatever it is that you do that makes you you. And Jen, wrap it up for us.
So thanks everyone for joining us today. And so Gail, thank you for fielding that in the chat. Yes, everyone will be able to access the recording. Additionally, you will get an email from me with the Zoom links and then also descriptions of the supplemental sessions that will be this week and next week. And so be on the lookout for an email.
There are more questions coming in, so join us Thursday and we'll have a chance to talk about them. Take good care, everyone.